The courthouse was quiet, the air thick with the kind of tense anticipation that only comes before a major trial. Lawyers whispered amongst themselves, their eyes darting toward the judge's bench, while the court officers took their places. In the front row, a group of journalists sat, ready to document every move, every word. It was the kind of day where every second felt like it was under a magnifying glass. And yet, no one could have predicted the chaos that was about to unfold. Elon Musk walked into the courtroom, his presence immediately commanding attention. But it wasn't his usual suit or sleek business attire that caught everyone off guard. No, today, the world's most famous entrepreneur and tech mogul was wearing something completely unexpected, a long, flowing Coss, the traditional ceremonial robe from Eastern Europe, complete with intricate embroidery in a deep, dark red hue. The robe was a symbol of cultural heritage, a nod to something old and ancient. But in a modern American courtroom, it was entirely out of place. The room fell silent. Judge Olivia Gray, a seasoned legal professional with decades of experience, sat in her seat, staring in disbelief at the man before her. She had seen many things in her courtroom, but this was beyond the ordinary. Her eyes narrowed, and her lips pursed. She took a deep breath and, with a calm yet firm voice, spoke. "Mr. Musk," she said, her gaze never leaving his, "I must say, I am quite surprised to see you dressed in such unconventional attire today." Elon Musk, standing tall in the center of the courtroom, offered a slight, almost mischievous smile. "I thought it would add a bit of flair to the proceedings," he said with a nonchalant shrug, his voice betraying no sense of concern. "Is it a problem?" Judge Gray's eyes flickered, her professional demeanor slipping just slightly. She had dealt with many high-profile cases, but this was something else. She wasn't sure whether to be offended, amused, or simply confused. However, she was also a stickler for decorum, and in her courtroom, she had always insisted on respect for the rules. This, to her, was an affront. "I believe it is," she replied, her voice firming. "You're in a court of law, Mr. Musk, not a fashion show. If you wish to be taken seriously, I suggest you adhere to the dress code. The robe is inappropriate, and I am fining you $500 for your disregard of courtroom protocol." There was a brief moment of silence. The air in the room seemed to freeze, as if everyone in the courtroom was holding their breath. The tension was palpable. But Elon Musk didn't flinch. Instead, he nodded, his expression still light. "If you say so, Your Honor," he replied, his tone a mixture of amusement and indifference. "But, I have to say, this fine is a bit unexpected. I'll pay it, of course. But perhaps we could discuss it in a bit more depth, after the trial. I'm sure you'll find there's more to this than meets the eye." Judge Gray, who had hoped for a simple and straightforward day, was now locked into an unexpected confrontation with one of the most famous figures in the world. She couldn't help but feel her frustration grow. She was no stranger to eccentric billionaires and public figures, but this was different. The courtroom wasn't the place for stunts. The journalists in the room were already scribbling notes, their cameras poised to capture the drama. News outlets would be buzzing with stories about Musk's bizarre fashion choice, and the hashtag #ElonMusk would trend in minutes. But it wasn't just the robe that had caught their attention, it was Musk's audacity, his ability to turn something as mundane as a courtroom appearance into a spectacle. It wasn't just about the fine, it was about the spectacle he created in a place that was supposed to be about law and order. As the judge pounded her gavel, signaling the start of the proceedings, she couldn't shake the feeling that this was no ordinary trial. There was something about Elon Musk that was always unpredictable, always just a little bit ahead of everyone else. Was this robe simply a mistake? A joke? Or was there something more at play? The courtroom remained on edge, the weight of the moment heavy in the air. The story of Elon Musk, a man who had reshaped the tech industry and now seemed poised to reshape the very idea of what could be considered acceptable in a courtroom, was just beginning to unfold. But no one knew yet how deep the rabbit hole went. As the trial began, the usual formalities took place, and everyone fell into their roles. Lawyers presented their arguments, witnesses were called, and Judge Gray remained stoic. But there was a noticeable undercurrent in the room, a palpable curiosity about the man in the Coss. The journalists couldn't help themselves. They had already begun to speculate about his motivations, trying to decipher whether this was a strategic move, a protest, or just another example of Musk's eccentricity. The media loved a good mystery, and this was one that promised to keep them captivated for days to come. Meanwhile, Musk sat quietly, his eyes scanning the room, his posture relaxed. He didn't seem to be bothered by the attention or the fine. In fact, he appeared completely at ease. Perhaps it was because he knew something they didn't, something that would soon turn the entire situation on its head. Musk had a history of shaking up the status quo, of challenging the world's perceptions of what was possible. Whether it was sending rockets into space, developing electric cars, or launching a private space exploration company, he had made a career out of proving the impossible was within reach. But this time, it wasn't about rockets or electric vehicles. It was about something else entirely, a courtroom, a robe, and a moment of defiance that would soon unravel into something far more profound. As the morning wore on, it became clear that this trial would be remembered for reasons far beyond the case at hand. The Coss, the fine, and the sheer audacity of Elon Musk would become the starting point of a story that no one saw coming. But what was the real story? What had motivated him to wear such an unusual outfit? And what was he really trying to say? The answers to these questions were only beginning to emerge, and as the trial continued, everyone, especially Judge Gray, would soon find themselves caught in a whirlwind of legal brilliance, cultural exploration, and an unexpected journey that would challenge everything they thought they knew about the law. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. This story might just spark a new beginning. What's one thing that always pushes you forward, even when things get tough? The courtroom buzzed as Judge Gray called for a brief recess. Journalists scurried outside, their phones already busy, typing up the latest headline, Elon Musk fined for wearing a Coss in court. The story was already going viral, and while it was clear the attention was on his unorthodox attire, no one could fully grasp why Musk would choose such an eccentric statement. No one except Musk himself. While the world watched, Elon Musk sat back in his chair, lost in thought. He wasn't simply the tech mogul everyone knew, the one who revolutionized space travel, electric vehicles, and artificial intelligence. Beneath the headlines and the flashy businesses, there was a man who often made choices that others would consider bizarre. Choices that, in hindsight, seemed designed to challenge the conventional, to spark curiosity, and, most importantly, to force people to think. Elon's story didn't begin in the public eye. It began in Pretoria, South Africa, where he was born into a world far removed from Silicon Valley. Growing up in a family that was well off but not wealthy, Elon was a curious child with a deep love for technology and science. His father, Elon Musk, an electromechanical engineer, often encouraged Elon's technical interest, but it was his mother, May, a dietitian and model, who provided the emotional support and inspiration he needed to keep going. While Errol was often distant, May was the one who always believed in Elon, even when he doubted himself. From a young age, Elon was driven by an insatiable curiosity. He taught himself programming at the age of 12, creating his first video game called Blaster, which he sold to a magazine for $500. That was just the beginning of a long journey filled with ambition, risk, and extraordinary decisions. It wasn't long before Elon realized he had a greater vision for the world, one that extended beyond the borders of South Africa. At 17, Elon moved to Canada to attend Queen's University, leaving behind a difficult home life and an ever-pressing need to prove himself. The next step in his journey was the University of Pennsylvania, where he earned 2 degrees, one in economics from the Wharton School and another in physics. During those college years, he didn't just study, he began to dream. It was during this time that he began to see the future in a way few others could. His mind raced with ideas about electric cars, renewable energy, and the possibility of space exploration. But none of those ideas were easy to bring to life. To many, they seemed too far-fetched, too impossible. The truth was, Musk had always been something of a misfit, a visionary whose ideas didn't always fit within the conventional framework. And that misfit mentality was something that would follow him for the rest of his career. But the path to success wasn't smooth. In his early adult years, Elon struggled with personal and professional setbacks. In the late 1990s, after founding his first company, Zip2, and selling it for a substantial sum, he plunged most of his earnings into a new venture, X.com. That decision would ultimately lead to PayPal, the wildly successful payment platform that would cement Musk's place in the world of Silicon Valley. However, his journey wasn't without its challenges. At one point, Elon was ousted from PayPal by the company's board of directors, a painful experience that could have shattered any other entrepreneur. For Musk, though, setbacks like these were simply fuel for his fire. It didn't matter how many doors were slammed in his face, he would find another way in. That tenacity led to SpaceX, Tesla, SolarCity, and a series of other ventures that would forever alter the future. But through it all, he never quite fit the traditional mold of the businessman. His decision-making was often unconventional, his actions unpredictable, and his public persona a blend of genius and eccentricity. In a way, this latest courtroom appearance, wearing a Coss, was just another example of the man behind the brand. The Coss, to Musk, wasn't just a random choice. It was something deeply personal, tied to a culture that had shaped his worldview in ways no one could fully comprehend. It was a symbol of heritage, of something ancient and timeless. The robe was a nod to his own family's European roots, a quiet tribute to his great-grandfather, who had worn similar attire in his native Eastern Europe. The Coss was also symbolic of rebellion. Wearing it in a courtroom, especially in a country that valued tradition and formalities, was a challenge to the rigid systems that many people, including the legal community, followed blindly. Elon Musk, after all, had made a career out of defying expectations and rewriting the rules. As the recess came to an end, Elon stood and stretched his legs. His mind shifted to the next stage of the trial. He knew it wasn't just about the fine anymore. The judge had set the stage for a battle of wills, and while Musk was certainly prepared to pay the fine, he wasn't interested in letting the matter go. There was a larger issue at play here, one that he had been thinking about for years. To Musk, the courtroom wasn't just a place where laws were decided, it was a place where authority was tested, where boundaries were drawn and then crossed. And, as with so many things in his life, this would be a test of both intellect and will. Judge Olivia Gray might have been a force to be reckoned with, but Elon Musk was a force all his own. He had learned to play the game in ways that no one expected. Back in the courtroom, as Judge Gray returned to her bench, she shot Musk a quick glance. She had spent much of the recess pondering the events of the morning. She had met many people in her career, many rich and influential figures, but there was something about Elon Musk that unsettled her. It wasn't just his wealth or fame, it was the way he carried himself, the underlying confidence that seemed to come from a place beyond conventional success. She had never encountered a man quite like him, and she wasn't sure whether she admired him or resented him for it. The next phase of the trial began with a noticeable shift. Elon Musk, once perceived as just a rich tech mogul, was now the subject of intense scrutiny. The media were fascinated, yes, but they also saw something in Musk that they hadn't fully understood before. He was unpredictable, but there was method to his madness. The Coss wasn't just a fashion statement. It was a symbol of something much deeper. The courtroom, once filled with whispers of curiosity, now buzzed with tension. The journalists in the front row, their pens dancing over their notepads, could barely contain their excitement. Elon Musk was not just another billionaire businessman. He was something else entirely, someone who had defied every norm and expectation that the world had thrown at him. But now, it seemed that even the legal system was going to be part of his revolution. Judge Olivia Gray had never experienced a trial like this. She had presided over countless high-profile cases during her years on the bench, cases involving billionaires, celebrities, and corporate titans, but none of them had ever felt quite so personal. There was something about Musk's presence that unnerved her. It wasn't just the robe or the fine, although those were certainly unexpected. It was the way he seemed to view the courtroom as just another arena in which he could bend the rules to his will. She had a deep respect for the law, and yet, there was something about Musk's flippant disregard for it that made her uneasy. As the trial resumed, the atmosphere in the room became even more charged. Judge Gray cleared her throat and adjusted her glasses, trying to push aside her personal feelings. "Mr. Musk," she began, her voice firm but measured, "we will continue with the proceedings. I expect full cooperation from you, regardless of your attire. This is a court of law, and the rules of decorum must be respected." Elon Musk, who had been casually leaning back in his chair, flashed her a smirk that hinted at his usual irreverence. "Of course, Your Honor," he said smoothly. "I wouldn't dream of disrespecting the court. I'm just here to make sure we get to the real issue at hand." The tension in the room grew palpable. The judge's face reddened slightly, and the lawyers exchanged uneasy glances. It was clear that Musk wasn't going to make this easy. He wasn't here to simply answer charges or pay fines. He was here to make a statement, and his message was just beginning to unfold. Elon's thoughts were racing, and in that moment, he felt more alive than ever. This courtroom, this old institution of law and order, was just another system that needed to be dismantled, re-examined, and reshaped. He didn't care about the fine. He didn't care about the robe. What mattered was the bigger picture, breaking down the barriers that stifled creativity, innovation, and progress. He had spent his life questioning the status quo, whether it was the electric car industry or space travel, and he wasn't about to stop now. This court, these rules, were just another roadblock in his way. The trial, which had started out as a simple case of courtroom decorum, now threatened to turn into something much larger, a battle between two forces. On one side, Judge Gray, the embodiment of tradition, who had spent years studying the law and making sure it was upheld without question. On the other side, Elon Musk, a man who had made a career of disregarding the status quo and bending the rules to fit his vision. As the day wore on, the stakes became clearer. Musk had made it clear that this trial wasn't about a fine, nor was it about a simple misunderstanding. He was using this moment to challenge the very foundation of how we see authority and power. His actions were deliberate, calculated to draw attention and force people to rethink the systems that governed their lives. The question wasn't whether he would pay the fine, it was whether he could use this court to make a deeper point about the world he was trying to create. The opposing counsel, Mr. Harrison, a seasoned corporate attorney, spoke up from across the courtroom. "Your Honor," he began, his voice steady and professional, "while we understand that Mr. Musk's choice of attire is unconventional, we must insist that we proceed with the case. The matter at hand is the financial transaction between Mr. Musk's company and the plaintiff. The details of his personal appearance are irrelevant." But it was clear that Musk wasn't interested in sticking to the script. "I would argue, Mr. Harrison," he interjected, his tone calm but firm, "that my personal appearance is highly relevant. In fact, it's central to what's happening here. We're not just talking about a company or a contract. We're talking about the future of how we engage with institutions, how we challenge the old systems, and how we envision a better world. My choice of attire speaks to that. So I'd like to discuss it further, if I may." Harrison's face tightened, his eyebrows knitting together in frustration. The other lawyers exchanged confused looks. No one was expecting Musk to turn a financial dispute into a philosophical debate. But that was exactly what he was doing. Judge Gray, however, wasn't ready to let the conversation drift too far from the case. "Mr. Musk," she said, her voice still composed but tinged with growing impatience, "we are here to discuss the matters at hand. This is not a platform for philosophical musings. I expect you to stay focused on the legal proceedings, or I will have no choice but to hold you in contempt. Musk leaned forward slightly, his eyes locking with the judge's. With all due respect, Your Honor, I believe that what we're discussing here today is exactly what matters. This isn't just a matter of legal procedure, it's about how the world is changing. We're in the middle of a revolution, and it's not just in tech or business. It's everywhere. And yes, it starts in places like this, where the old guard tries to hold on to the past, and the rest of us fight for a future that's better, more open, and more innovative. The room fell silent. His words hung in the air, daring anyone to challenge them. Judge Gray's grip tightened on her gavel, and for a moment, she almost felt herself losing control of the room. She had always prided herself on her ability to maintain order, but Elon Musk was something else. He was unpredictable, chaotic, and undeniably charismatic. She had no idea where this trial was heading, but one thing was clear, this wasn't just about the fine anymore. It was about something much bigger. Elon Musk's actions were forcing everyone in the room, including the judge, to question the world they had built. The tension between tradition and innovation was palpable, and the trial had become more than a legal battle. It was the beginning of a fight for the future. The tension in the courtroom reached an almost unbearable level. The air was thick with anticipation. People weren't just watching for a legal outcome anymore, they were watching history unfold. Elon Musk, in his unconventional robe, had shifted the dynamics of the trial into a battleground for ideals. The crowd of spectators, journalists, and lawyers were no longer mere observers, they were participants in a moment that would reverberate far beyond this courthouse. Judge Olivia Gray had barely managed to keep the proceedings moving, her patience wearing thin. She had expected to handle a simple case involving a fine for a minor courtroom infraction, but Musk had turned it into something far more complex. And now, in a sudden shift, Musk was pushing the boundaries of what the courtroom was meant to represent. His mind was racing, and though outwardly calm, he was well aware that the stakes had just gotten higher than anyone had anticipated. A fresh sense of resolve filled Musk. If he was going to challenge the norms, if he was going to make a real impact, this was the moment. The courtroom was his stage, and it wasn't just about the fine anymore, it was about tearing down the walls that kept the world shackled to outdated systems. Every word he said, every decision he made, was about making a statement. He had no plans to back down. Your Honor, Musk said, breaking the silence that had lingered after his last remark, I'm not here to simply wear a robe and get fined. I'm here because this system, the very legal system we rely on, is flawed. It's built on old ideas, rigid boundaries that stifle progress. People like you, like me, have been taught that there are rules you must follow. But the truth is, sometimes those rules need to be broken for the sake of the greater good. You don't change the world by playing it safe. You change the world by challenging the status quo. Judge Gray's eyes narrowed as Musk's words seemed to echo through the room, sinking in deeper with each syllable. He wasn't just speaking about the case. He was speaking to everyone in the room, to the very heart of the system she had spent her career upholding. It wasn't an easy thing to hear. The law was supposed to be impartial, a steady hand guiding society through the chaos of human existence. And yet, Musk was pointing out something she had never fully acknowledged before, that the law, like everything else, could be too rigid, too slow to keep up with the times. As the courtroom's silence deepened, Judge Gray struggled to maintain control. She cleared her throat, breaking the spell that had formed around Musk's words. Mr. Musk, she began, her voice tight with both professional decorum and personal frustration, I understand your perspective. But this is a court of law, not a forum for philosophical debate. I have a duty to uphold the law, and that is what we will focus on here. You may not wear attire that is deemed inappropriate for this setting, and that, Mr. Musk, is all there is to it. Musk's lips curled into a small smile. But that's just it, Judge. The law doesn't exist in a vacuum. It evolves, or it should. The world around us is changing, and you can either be part of that change or you can resist it. I've always believed in pushing boundaries, in finding new ways to solve problems, and in questioning everything, especially the things we take for granted. You, of all people, should understand that. There it was, the challenge laid bare. For a brief moment, there was a flicker of something in Judge Gray's eyes, something that might have been recognition, or perhaps, the hint of doubt. She had spent decades as a guardian of the law, but was Musk right? Was she, in her quest to maintain order and tradition, unknowingly holding back progress? The idea gnawed at her, a question she hadn't expected to confront today. She shifted in her seat, gathering her thoughts before speaking again. You're not wrong about progress, Mr. Musk. But I am a judge, and I am bound by rules. If every person who felt their ideas were groundbreaking came into this court and bent the rules to fit their narrative, what would be left of our justice system? How would we function if we discarded tradition whenever it no longer served our individual needs? Elon leaned forward, his eyes alight with the same fire that had fueled his businesses, his vision, and now, his very presence in this courtroom. Judge, I'm not asking you to throw out tradition entirely. What I'm asking is for you to consider whether it's time to adapt. To evolve. To see beyond the limits that are so ingrained in our minds. If we don't challenge the system, if we don't push the boundaries, we'll always be stuck where we are, stagnant, unable to move forward. The room was still, every word hanging in the air, unanswered and unresolved. The silence stretched longer than anyone had expected, and for the first time in a long while, Judge Gray felt her confidence waver. She wasn't used to being in a position of doubt, especially not in a courtroom. She was the one who was supposed to command authority, to uphold the rules. But Musk's challenge had put her in a place she hadn't prepared for. The realization slowly dawned on her. This trial, which had started as a simple matter of a courtroom infraction, had transformed into something much larger. She wasn't just presiding over a case. She was involved in a battle for ideas, for control over the very system she had spent her life working within. The more she thought about it, the more she saw Musk's point. The law could be a tool for justice, yes, but it could also become a cage if it was not flexible enough to accommodate new ideas and new ways of thinking. Suddenly, the door to the courtroom opened with a sharp creak, breaking the tension. The bailiff entered, carrying a stack of documents. He handed them to Judge Gray, his eyes darting nervously between the two figures at the center of the storm. Your Honor, he said quietly, there's something important you should see. Judge Gray took the papers and glanced through them quickly. As her eyes scanned the pages, a frown began to form on her face. It was a new development, an unexpected twist to the case. And it was a twist that could change everything. Her gaze flicked up to Elon Musk, who was watching her with an intensity that was almost unsettling. Mr. Musk, she said slowly, it seems there's more to this case than I originally thought. And perhaps we need to reevaluate everything. The courtroom had just entered a new phase, and the stakes were higher than ever. The air in the courtroom felt thick with uncertainty, as if the walls themselves were holding their breath. Elon Musk sat there, his expression unreadable, as Judge Olivia Gray scanned the documents the bailiff had handed her. The quiet murmur of the room was barely perceptible, but everyone knew that something had shifted. The tension that had been building for hours was now coming to a head, and none of them knew how it was going to end. Musk leaned forward, his curiosity piqued by the sudden shift in Judge Gray's demeanor. Her face, which had been stern and composed throughout the trial, was now clouded with concern. She glanced up from the papers, her eyes locking onto his. For a moment, there was an unspoken exchange between them, a recognition that the game had changed. This was no longer about a minor courtroom infraction or even a fine. This was bigger than either of them had anticipated. Mr. Musk, Judge Gray finally spoke, her voice steady but tinged with an emotion that was hard to place. It appears there's more to this case than meets the eye. These documents, she gestured to the papers in her hands, reveal something unexpected. Something that, frankly, changes everything." A hushed silence fell over the courtroom. Musk's pulse quickened. What was she talking about? Had the court uncovered some piece of evidence that could turn the case in his favor, or was it something else entirely? Judge Gray's eyes flicked down to the papers again, and then back to Elon. "It seems that you, Mr. Musk, are not just involved in this case on a surface level. You're connected to the plaintiff, more closely than I would have thought." Musk blinked, processing her words. His mind raced as he tried to make sense of what she was implying. "Connected?" he asked, his voice low. "In what way?" Judge Gray's gaze softened for a moment, as if the weight of what she was about to reveal had hit her as well. "There are financial transactions, personal connections, and," she paused, gathering her thoughts, "confidential agreements that you and the plaintiff shared in private dealings. It seems this case isn't just a matter of courtroom decorum. There's a deeper connection here that may explain the conflict." The room seemed to shrink around them, the spotlight now fully on Musk. His stomach turned in knots as the realization began to settle in. He had expected many things from this trial, but this was an unexpected revelation. The very foundation of his legal strategy, the reason he had walked into this court with such boldness, was now at risk of being unraveled. Judge Gray noticed the shift in Musk's demeanor, his sudden tension, and the change in his usually confident posture. For the first time during the trial, he looked genuinely unsettled. "Mr. Musk," she continued, her voice softening just a touch, "you appear to have known the plaintiff more intimately than you let on. These transactions suggest something beyond a mere business relationship. And now, I'm beginning to wonder if there are layers to this case that we haven't even begun to uncover." The weight of her words hit Musk like a wave. What was she implying? Had he been set up? Had someone orchestrated this entire fiasco to force him into a corner? He leaned back in his chair, trying to compose himself, but his mind was racing. The one thing he couldn't afford was to lose control of the narrative. If this revelation was true, then the entire public-facing persona of the trial, the battle he'd fought to make a statement, could be turned against him. A loud cough broke the silence, and Musk's lawyer, Mary Ellison, stepped forward, her expression tense but controlled. "Your Honor," she said carefully, "with all due respect, I believe there may be a misunderstanding. Mr. Musk's involvement with the plaintiff is not what it may seem. There are numerous details." Judge Gray raised a hand, signaling for Mary to hold her thoughts. "I'm not suggesting anything untoward, Ms. Ellison. I'm simply stating the facts that have come to light." She looked back down at the documents and then up at Musk. "These documents indicate a level of financial involvement that goes beyond the scope of what was initially presented to this court. And it's clear that these connections could have significant ramifications on both your case and your public image." Elon felt the pressure mount. The stakes had never been this high. It was one thing to fight a legal battle, it was another entirely to face the possibility that everything he had built could come crashing down because of a single secret he hadn't even known was in danger of being exposed. His mind raced, scrambling for an explanation, a way to salvage this, to regain control. But as the realization set in, he also understood something else. He had spent his entire life challenging the world, poking holes in systems, breaking down barriers, but here, in this courtroom, the real battle wasn't just about proving he was right. It was about confronting the vulnerabilities he had hidden beneath his bravado. "You know," Musk said, his voice quiet but filled with a certain resolve, "I've always been willing to take risks, to push boundaries. But I've never been in a situation where the line between personal and professional is so blurred." Judge Gray raised an eyebrow, surprised by his admission. The man who had spent the better part of his life redefining industries was now acknowledging something as simple as vulnerability. "And yet here you are, Mr. Musk, in this very courtroom, facing the consequences of those blurred lines. You're not just here for a simple fine. You're here because of something far more complicated than you anticipated." Musk paused, his eyes scanning the room. The weight of everything that had led him to this point, everything he had fought for and against, seemed to hang in the air, unresolved. For the first time, he realized that perhaps the rules of the game had shifted, and it wasn't just about whether he could win. It was about whether he could live with the consequences of the choices he had made. This trial, he said slowly, looking directly at Judge Gray, isn't just about me. It's about what happens when the rules no longer make sense, when they're used to suppress progress. I may not have chosen the best way to fight, but I'll be damned if I don't keep pushing for change. This is bigger than this courtroom. It's about the future. Judge Gray seemed to regard him for a long moment, as if weighing the truth in his words. The emotion that had flickered in her eyes earlier was now replaced with a deeper understanding. The law might have been her domain, but it wasn't the only force shaping the world. The courtroom was silent again, but this time, the silence was filled with the weight of something monumental. The atmosphere in the courtroom was thick with anticipation. The revelation that had shaken Elon Musk, the judge, and the entire room still hung heavily in the air. For a moment, it felt as though time itself had paused, leaving everyone suspended in a limbo between what they had expected and what had just been uncovered. Judge Olivia Gray glanced around the courtroom, her gaze lingering on the documents she held. She had thought this case would be a simple matter of upholding a courtroom rule, a minor infraction that would lead to a standard fine. But what had unfolded before her was far more complicated, an intricate web of relationships, secrets, and power that threatened to unravel everything she had believed about the legal system and the people who navigated it. Elon Musk sat at the defense table, his fingers drumming absent-mindedly on the wood. His mind was still racing, but something had shifted within him. The emotional rush of the previous moments, the shock of the revelations, the sudden awareness of his vulnerabilities, had given way to something else. A quiet clarity. He had always prided himself on challenging conventions, but today, he had discovered something new. It wasn't just about breaking rules or disrupting systems anymore. It was about understanding the consequences of his actions, the impact they had on the people around him, and how far the ripples of those actions could spread. You know, Musk said, breaking the silence, his voice steady but thoughtful, this isn't just about me. It's never just been about me. It's about the choices we make, the way we shape the world, and how those choices come back to us. Judge Gray lifted her eyes to meet his, sensing a shift in him, a realization that had settled over him like a quiet storm. What do you mean, Mr. Musk? Elon leaned forward slightly, his gaze never leaving hers. I've spent my life thinking I could change the world by force of will, by bending things to my will. And I've been successful, to an extent. But sitting here, in this moment, I'm realizing that change doesn't just happen because we break things or disrupt systems. It happens when we understand the system, work within it, and then, only then, do we make the necessary adjustments. Judge Gray nodded slowly, taking in his words. For the first time during this trial, she saw a side of Musk she hadn't expected, a vulnerability, a self-awareness that he had rarely displayed in public. It was a moment of growth, one that had taken him from a man who had always pushed boundaries to someone who was now beginning to understand the true weight of those boundaries, and the importance of respecting them. Mr. Musk, she said, her voice softer now, I'm beginning to see that you've come to understand something important. The law, while not perfect, exists to provide structure, to provide fairness. It can be a tool for good, even if it's flawed. And maybe that's what this case is really about. It's not just about whether you wear a robe or pay a fine, it's about what we do when we realize the systems around us are broken, and how we choose to fix them. The words seemed to settle in the room, and for the first time that day, the tension in the air lifted just a little. Musk looked at her, and for a brief moment, the animosity between them melted away. There was an understanding between them now, one that transcended the legal fight. It was a shared recognition that, despite their differences, they were both seeking the same thing, progress. Judge Gray took a deep breath, glancing down at the pile of documents once more. I have a decision to make, Mr. Musk, she said, her voice firm, yet calm. And I'll be honest with you. I've spent my career upholding the rules, sometimes blindly. But today, I see that those rules need to be examined, to be challenged. You're right about one thing: change doesn't happen by sitting still. It happens when we confront the uncomfortable truths and decide to move forward, not just with the world, but with the system itself. Musk felt a sense of calm wash over him. The battle wasn't over yet, but the fight had changed. It was no longer about the fine, no longer about the clothes or the legal infractions. It was about a larger conversation, one that could reshape the future. As Judge Gray stood, ready to make her ruling, the room fell silent again, everyone waiting for the final verdict. Elon could feel the weight of it, but this time, it didn't feel like a weight that would crush him. It felt like a weight that would propel him forward. "Mr. Musk," Judge Gray began, her voice clear and resolute, "the court has decided that while your actions in this courtroom were unorthodox, they were not without purpose. You've challenged the very foundation of our assumptions, and in doing so, you've sparked a conversation that goes beyond this case. It's a conversation about change, about growth, and about the future of our legal system." The room held its breath as she paused for a moment. Then, she continued, "However, I cannot overlook the fact that rules were still broken, and there must be consequences for that. I am imposing a fine of $1,000, which I believe is a reasonable amount given the circumstances. But let this also serve as a reminder that the rules exist to ensure fairness, to ensure that we have a framework to operate within. Even in times of change, that framework is necessary." Musk nodded quietly, accepting her decision. The fine wasn't the point anymore. The point was that the conversation had begun, that the seeds of change had been planted. And that, he realized, was worth far more than any amount of money. As the courtroom slowly emptied, Musk sat back in his seat, the adrenaline of the trial slowly ebbing away. He felt a strange sense of peace settling over him. It wasn't the outcome he had expected, but it was the one he had needed. And in the end, that might be the most important lesson of all. Judge Gray lingered for a moment, her eyes meeting Musk's once more. There was something there, something she hadn't expected to find in this trial. It was the realization that even in the most rigid systems, there was room for change, for growth, and for evolution. "You've given me something to think about, Mr. Musk," she said quietly. "And you've given me something to learn, Your Honor," he replied. With that, they both turned toward the door, knowing that the story was far from over. The courtroom doors slammed shut behind Elon Musk as he stepped out into the crisp afternoon air. His mind was still buzzing with the events of the day. Everything had changed, but he wasn't entirely sure how or where this new journey would take him. The weight of the fine, the courtroom drama, and the unexpected reflection on his actions lingered in his chest, heavy but oddly motivating. He had walked into the courtroom with a plan, to fight, to push boundaries, and to make a statement. But the statement he had made wasn't what he had anticipated. It wasn't about proving the world wrong or pushing society to the brink of its understanding. It had been about understanding that sometimes, the most profound change comes not from breaking the system, but from working within it. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his thoughts. He pulled it out and saw a message from his assistant, "Alex, the media is going crazy over the verdict. You need to prepare for the storm. They're calling it a landmark case. A slight grin tugged at the corner of Musk's mouth. This was just like him, always on the cutting edge, even if the cutting edge was an unexpected courtroom drama. He had a tendency to find himself in the thick of things, to stir the pot. But this time, it felt different. For once, it wasn't about fighting for attention. It wasn't about creating controversy for the sake of innovation or progress. This time, it had felt like a step toward understanding, toward being heard not as a disruptor, but as a part of a much larger conversation. As Musk stepped into the waiting car, the air inside the vehicle felt suddenly colder than it had outside. The contrast was jarring, and he realized he wasn't just cold from the temperature. The world outside had shifted, and the temperature inside the car was now filled with questions, consequences, and the weight of his actions. He sat back, trying to quiet his mind, but it was hard. His thoughts raced. What came next? Back at the office, he was greeted by his team, their faces a mixture of concern and curiosity. They had been waiting for him to return, to deliver some clarity about the situation, and now that he was there, their questions came flooding in. "Elon, what happened in the courtroom?" asked Ben, his lead strategist. "That fine, it's going to be everywhere. The media is spinning it as a wake-up call for you." "I think it's more than just a fine," Elon replied, his voice calm but thoughtful. "It's a lesson. A hard one, but a lesson nonetheless. The truth is, I've spent so much time trying to change the world from the outside, I didn't realize I needed to start by changing myself. The system can be frustrating, but maybe the way forward isn't about smashing it down. Maybe it's about using it to fuel the change I want to see." Ben was quiet for a moment. "So you're saying this trial wasn't about winning the case?" "No, it wasn't about that at all. It was about discovering that change doesn't always come from tearing things apart. Sometimes it's about working within the structure, challenging it in a way that still allows us to move forward." The conversation shifted after that, as Musk's team began to pivot from crisis management to exploring the long-term impact of the trial. They realized that the case wasn't just a legal matter, it was becoming a symbol. Whether they liked it or not, Musk had once again put himself at the center of a conversation that was bigger than any one individual. The media would likely spin it in 100 different ways, but one thing was certain: Musk had taken a step that would change how people viewed him, and more importantly, how they viewed the systems around them. Later that night, Musk sat alone in his office, the city lights casting long shadows across the floor. He thought about the moment in the courtroom when Judge Gray had looked him in the eye and admitted that she, too, was beginning to question the systems in place. That was a rare admission from someone in her position, a powerful reminder that even those who uphold the law can see when it needs to evolve. His phone buzzed again, this time with a message from one of his longtime colleagues. "Yvonne, the media frenzy is escalating, and a few of the board members are concerned. They're calling it a PR nightmare. Are we going to address this head-on or lay low?" Elon paused for a long moment before typing back, "We address it head-on. But not with an apology. Let's frame it as a conversation. A turning point." He hit send, the weight of the decision already settling in. He knew it wouldn't be easy, but then again, when had anything in his life ever been easy? This wasn't a moment to retreat into the shadows. This was his chance to lead the charge into a new kind of discourse, one where innovation and reflection could coexist. As the days passed, the media attention intensified. Headlines blared with phrases like, "Musk's legal revolution," "the man who challenged the system," and "Elon Musk, from rule breaker to rule maker." Critics and supporters alike flooded the airwaves, dissecting every detail of the trial, from the fine to the judge's remarks to Musk's unusual attire. But amidst the frenzy, something unexpected began to happen. People started reaching out to him, not with demands or critiques, but with a question: what comes next? Musk began to realize that the public had seen the vulnerability he had shown in the courtroom, and they were hungry for more. The media had been quick to label him a villain or a hero, but Musk understood now that those labels were too simplistic. The real change was going to come not from his actions in the courtroom, but from the way he engaged with the world moving forward. He gathered his team once more, this time to discuss a new direction, a project, perhaps, that would build on the momentum of the trial and open up new avenues for innovation and dialogue. They brainstormed ideas, working late into the night, as Musk sketched out the beginnings of a new initiative. What if we created a platform for people to share ideas about how the system can evolve? Musk mused aloud. A space where people can challenge the status quo, not by tearing it down, but by suggesting real, actionable changes. Ben leaned forward. "You're talking about a place where people can discuss change, not just as an abstract idea, but as something they can actively contribute to. A space for solutions, not just critiques." Musk nodded, a small smile tugging at his lips. Exactly. It's time we stop seeing the world as something to break down. It's time to start building something better, together. The seeds of a new venture were planted that night. Elon Musk, the man who had spent his life changing industries, now found himself on the cusp of creating something entirely new. It wasn't just about the future of technology anymore. It was about the future of the systems that governed it, and how they could evolve to better serve the people within them. As he left the meeting and walked out into the night, Musk felt the familiar rush of excitement. This was a new beginning. Not just for him, but for everyone. The weeks that followed the trial passed in a blur. Public reaction to the courtroom showdown between Elon Musk and Judge Olivia Gray had been nothing short of explosive. What had started as a seemingly trivial case, Musk wearing a robe in a courtroom and defying a simple dress code, had evolved into a cultural moment. Media outlets, social media platforms, and legal experts had dissected every angle, speculating about Musk's intentions, his possible legal genius, and the deeper implications of his actions. Despite the media storm, Musk remained focused on the one thing that mattered, making a difference. He'd spoken publicly about how the legal system needed to evolve and how individuals needed to challenge its rigidity, but now he realized that the real challenge was far greater. It was one thing to critique the system, it was quite another to offer tangible solutions. In the quiet of his home one evening, as he sat alone in his office looking out at the sprawling city skyline, Elon felt the weight of his next decision. It wasn't about his companies, his rockets, or his cars. It was about a broader vision, a vision of what it meant to engage with the world, not just as a disruptor, but as a builder. His phone rang, interrupting his thoughts. It was Alex, his assistant. "Hey, Elon. The board wants to meet with you. They're pushing for clarity on the direction we're going in after all this press. They're nervous about the fallout from the case," Alex said, her voice laced with concern. Elon sighed, knowing the conversation was inevitable. The board had always been cautious, but he had always thrived in the chaos. He'd turned obstacles into opportunities, challenges into innovations. But this was different. This time, he had to decide how far he was willing to go, not just for his companies, but for the change he wanted to see in the world. "I'll be there in an hour," he replied, ending the call and standing up from his desk. As he grabbed his coat, his thoughts swirled. The world had been watching. Now it was time to show them what he had learned. The boardroom was full when Elon arrived. The room was filled with familiar faces, some of them skeptical, others more supportive of his unconventional ideas. They were all looking at him, waiting for him to take control of the conversation and, once again, steer them towards something bold and disruptive. "All right, Elon," Ben, his lead strategist, said, sitting across from him. "The media's been calling it a turning point. But what does that mean for us? We need a plan moving forward." Elon settled into his seat, the familiar weight of leadership on his shoulders. He could feel the eyes on him, expectant, anxious. They were waiting for him to lead, as always. But this time, he knew the stakes were higher. This time, it wasn't just about pushing boundaries for the sake of innovation. It was about proving that change could be meaningful, that it could come from within the systems we so often take for granted. "I think we're at the precipice of something bigger than just a public relations campaign," Musk began, his voice steady, his mind clear. What happened in that courtroom wasn't about breaking the rules. It was about recognizing that the systems we work within, whether it's the legal system, the business world, or even social systems, need to evolve. They need to become adaptable to change, and they need to serve people, not just the powers that be. There was a murmur around the room. Some nodded in agreement, while others seemed unsure. Musk could feel their hesitation. They were used to the idea of shaking things up, but this was different. He wasn't asking for disruption for the sake of it, he was asking for systemic change, a shift in perspective. "So, what exactly are you proposing?" Yvonne, his longtime colleague, asked, her voice tinged with curiosity and concern. Are we going to start a campaign for legal reform? Musk shook his head, leaning forward. It's bigger than that. I want to create a platform, a space where people can come together to discuss, critique, and collaborate on ways to evolve the systems that govern us. We'll start with law, but it won't stop there. This is about opening the conversation. Giving people the tools to engage in the systems they often feel disconnected from. The room was silent as everyone processed his words. For a moment, no one spoke. Then Ben, the strategist, broke the silence. You want us to create a platform where people can challenge the legal system? How do we ensure it's productive? How do we stop it from becoming just another echo chamber? Elon's eyes gleamed with excitement. That's the challenge. It won't be easy. But we'll use technology to facilitate the conversation. We'll use artificial intelligence, data analytics, and crowdsourcing to identify key issues, propose solutions, and bring those solutions into the public sphere. We'll make sure it's focused on actionable change. The board members exchanged glances. Some were unsure, others intrigued. Musk knew this was the hard part, convincing them that this was more than just an idea. It was a movement. Let's call it the Evolution Initiative, Musk said, his voice firm. A place where people can not only challenge the status quo but also offer concrete, actionable solutions. It's time to stop talking about change and start making it happen. The tension in the room shifted. Some of the board members began to nod in agreement. The idea was audacious, certainly. But it was Musk's trademark. He had always been the one to take risks, to challenge the norms. This time, however, it was different. This wasn't about launching a new product or service, it was about launching a new way of thinking. You've got a lot of people to convince, Yvonne said, still processing the enormity of the idea. But if anyone can do it, it's you. Elon smiled, a small but confident grin. I've spent my life proving people wrong. I think it's time we prove something right. As the meeting came to a close, the board members had been swayed. Musk's vision had captured their attention, and with their support, the groundwork for the Evolution Initiative began to take shape. It wouldn't be easy, and it would take time. But it was a step in the right direction, a step toward creating real change, not just in business, but in the systems that governed it. As Elon left the boardroom, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. This was it, the road to redemption. The courtroom had been just the beginning. Now, he was ready to prove that the real change didn't come from breaking the rules. It came from understanding them, challenging them, and working within them to build something better. In the days that followed, Musk and his team began to flesh out the details of the Evolution Initiative. It would be a platform for collaboration, a space where individuals could propose solutions to legal challenges, societal issues, and business practices. Using cutting-edge technology, the platform would allow users to vote on ideas, discuss their merits, and push for tangible changes. But even as the groundwork was laid, Musk knew the true test had just begun. The real challenge wasn't in building the platform, it was in getting people to believe in it. He wasn't just asking them to engage in a new way of thinking, he was asking them to believe that they could make a difference, too. As he sat in his office, contemplating the road ahead, Musk couldn't help but feel a sense of excitement. This was more than just another project. This was the beginning of something that could change everything. It had been nearly a month since the inception of the Evolution Initiative, and the buzz surrounding it was growing louder by the day. What began as a bold, yet somewhat abstract idea was quickly gaining traction in the media, on social platforms, and in political circles. Elon Musk had once again captured the world's attention, not with rockets or electric cars, but with a daring vision for systemic change. Despite the excitement, the task ahead of him was anything but easy. While the board had endorsed the project, they were still apprehensive about its feasibility. Creating a platform where people could come together to discuss and influence societal change was a monumental undertaking. It wasn't just about making noise, it was about creating a space where meaningful discourse could lead to real, actionable outcomes. As Musk sat in his office reviewing the latest progress reports, his thoughts were focused on one thing: how could they build a system that was both open and accountable? The Evolution Initiative was an ambitious project, but it wasn't just about giving people a voice, it was about ensuring that voice was heard and acted upon. "Alex, get Ben on the line. We need to discuss how we're going to structure the platform," Musk said, his voice filled with a mix of determination and concern. A few moments later, his phone rang, and he saw the name, Ben, his lead strategist, flashing on the screen. "Ben, how's the development team coming along?" Musk asked as soon as he picked up. "We're making progress, but it's going to take a bit more time than we anticipated. The platform's framework is coming together, but we need to figure out how to ensure the discussions we're fostering actually lead to tangible outcomes," Ben replied. "We can't just create another echo chamber. We need something that can turn ideas into action." Elon leaned back in his chair, staring out at the city below. He was used to taking on monumental challenges. But this? This was uncharted territory. Creating a space for people to propose solutions and influence change was a colossal task. The sheer scale of it was daunting. "Agreed. We need a clear system for evaluating ideas, for moving from discussion to implementation," Musk said, his tone thoughtful. "What if we built in a system that incentivizes people not just to propose ideas, but to show how they can be put into practice? And then, we get the community to vote on which ideas should be prioritized." Ben was silent for a moment. "You're suggesting that we crowdsource the solutions, but also crowdsource the accountability. People wouldn't just share their ideas, they'd need to be able to demonstrate how they would make a difference, how they could work in the real world. And then the community gets to vote on them." "Exactly," Musk said, a spark of excitement in his voice. "We'll build in transparency, everything will be tracked, from the discussions to the voting, and even to the implementation. If an idea garners enough support, we'll find a way to help turn it into reality. This will be a platform for real, actionable change, not just theoretical discussions." Ben was clearly warming to the idea. "I think it could work. It would take time to develop the necessary tools, but if we get it right, it could revolutionize how people engage with systems. Instead of just protesting or complaining, they could be part of the solution." Musk nodded. "That's the vision. We don't want to just create a platform for people to vent their frustrations. We want to create a platform where people can actively shape the future." The next few weeks were a whirlwind of meetings, planning sessions, and strategy discussions. Musk and his team worked tirelessly to flesh out the details of the Evolution Initiative, while the development team focused on creating the necessary infrastructure to support it. They faced countless obstacles along the way: technical challenges, logistical issues, and resistance from some unlikely sources. But Musk's determination remained unshaken. One of the more unexpected hurdles came from a group of lawyers who questioned the legal viability of the platform. They argued that giving everyday people the power to propose and vote on changes to legal systems could lead to chaos, or worse, lawsuits. "Legal reform isn't something that can be decided by public vote," one lawyer had argued. "This platform could expose us to an endless stream of legal challenges. You can't just crowdsource the law." Musk wasn't deterred. "We're not looking to replace the law," he had replied. "We're looking to make the process of legal reform more transparent, more inclusive, and more responsive to the needs of the people. The goal is to start a conversation, not to rewrite the Constitution overnight." He knew that some resistance was inevitable. Whenever you're pushing the boundaries of something as deeply entrenched as the legal system, there will always be critics. But Musk had always thrived in the face of skepticism. And in this case, the more people pushed back, the more determined he became to prove them wrong. Despite the obstacles, the platform began to take shape. By the time the first beta version was ready, Musk's vision was clearer than ever. The Evolution Initiative would allow users to propose ideas, discuss them, vote on them, and then collaborate with experts and institutions to bring those ideas to life. It wasn't just about theory, it was about action. The platform was set to launch in just a few days, and the excitement was palpable. Musk's team had been working around the clock to ensure everything was ready, and Musk himself was preparing for the media blitz that would follow. He knew that the launch of the Evolution Initiative would be a defining moment, not just for him, but for the future of civic engagement. On the day of the launch, Musk stood backstage at a press event, the weight of the moment hanging in the air. He had spoken to the press countless times before, about space travel, electric cars, and artificial intelligence, but this was different. This wasn't about technology. This was about something much larger. It was about changing the way people thought about the systems that governed their lives. As he stepped onto the stage, the room fell silent. The cameras flashed, and reporters' pens moved furiously as they prepared to document the next big chapter in Musk's life. "Thank you for joining me today," Musk began, his voice steady but charged with the excitement of the moment. "Today marks the beginning of something that I believe will change the way we think about the world around us. The Evolution Initiative isn't just a platform, it's an opportunity for each of us to be part of a larger conversation. A conversation about how we can make our legal systems, our businesses, and our governments more responsive to the needs of the people." He paused, looking out at the sea of faces before him. "This is just the beginning. And together, we can shape the future we want to live in." The press room erupted in applause, but Musk barely heard it. In that moment, he knew that the hard work was only just beginning. The platform had launched, but now it was time to see if it would live up to its promise. As Musk left the stage and the event concluded, he allowed himself a brief moment of satisfaction. This was a new chapter, not just for him, but for everyone who was ready to challenge the status quo. It didn't take long for the Evolution Initiative to begin generating buzz. Within hours of launching, the platform saw an overwhelming number of sign-ups. People were eager to participate in discussions that had once seemed distant, too complex, or too bureaucratic to be accessible. Elon Musk's audacious vision for reform was starting to take shape, but what came next was beyond anyone's expectations. By the end of the first week, thousands of ideas had been proposed. Some were practical, others wildly ambitious, but each one represented an attempt to engage with the systems that shaped their lives. Topics ranged from legal reforms to innovations in healthcare, education, and even urban planning. The diversity of ideas was overwhelming, but Musk's team was ready. They had expected the flood of proposals, but what they hadn't anticipated was the level of engagement. "The system is being inundated," Alex said, standing in front of a large monitor in Elon's office, scrolling through the incoming suggestions. "We've got people submitting proposals on everything from renewable energy to reforming police accountability. And the discussions are intense." Elon walked over to the screen, scanning the topics. He could feel the energy in the room. This was exactly what he had envisioned, a space for people to not just talk about change, but to drive it forward. "This is just the beginning," Musk said, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "Now, we need to get organized. We can't just let it be a free-for-all. We need a system to identify the most impactful ideas and figure out how to move them from theory to practice." Alex nodded, tapping away at her tablet. "We're working on it. We've got teams assigned to categorize the ideas, prioritize the most urgent ones, and connect them with experts in those fields. But there's one thing that's starting to concern me, the backlash." Musk raised an eyebrow. "Backlash? From whom?" "From the traditional legal and political sectors," she explained. "Some legal scholars and politicians are already dismissing the platform as a dangerous experiment. They're saying that public crowdsourcing could undermine the integrity of the legal system." Musk's expression hardened. "Let them talk. The more they criticize, the more people will listen. It's what we've always done, turn skepticism into fuel." But even as he said the words, Musk knew there was a deeper challenge. The more the platform gained attention, the more it would be scrutinized. This wasn't just about building something that worked, it was about building something that could withstand the weight of opposition. Despite the initial pushback, the Evolution Initiative's community continued to grow. Within a few weeks, the platform had become a lively hub of debate, collaboration, and innovation. Proposals began to shift from general ideas into detailed action plans. The platform's transparency features, tracking votes, discussions, and the movement of ideas through various stages, ensured that no proposal would simply disappear into the void. If an idea had enough support, it would be sent to experts in that field for review and, if viable, eventually moved toward implementation. One of the first major proposals that garnered significant attention was a detailed plan for reforming the criminal justice system. It was a collaborative effort that involved dozens of legal experts, victims' rights advocates, and even former prisoners. The proposal called for a complete overhaul of sentencing guidelines, a focus on rehabilitation over punishment, and a reallocation of resources toward mental health services. The plan was bold, and the discussion it sparked was even bolder. As Musk read through the comments and suggestions from the community, he saw something that was becoming increasingly clear: people were ready for change, but they needed a voice. And now, they had one. He sat back in his chair, his eyes scanning the proposal's details. It was exactly the kind of systemic change he had envisioned. People weren't just complaining, they were actively creating solutions. And while the proposal was still in its infancy, the feedback from the platform's users was overwhelmingly positive. "This is it," Elon murmured to himself. "This is what we've been working for." As the weeks passed, more proposals followed, each one addressing a different aspect of society. Some focused on the environment, others on education, healthcare, and even workplace equality. It became clear that the platform was not just a place for conversation, it was becoming a force for change. But there was still one issue that loomed large: how could they transition from online discourse to tangible, real-world action? Elon knew that the ideas generated on the platform wouldn't be enough on their own. The next step was critical. They needed allies, people who could take these ideas and implement them in the real world. And that meant reaching out to governments, corporations, and institutions that were willing to listen. He picked up the phone, dialing a number he hadn't called in years. "Hello," came the voice on the other end. "Elon," he said. "It's been a while. Mr. Musk." The voice brightened. It was Jacob, an old contact from his days in the tech world, a former corporate strategist turned consultant with a long history of navigating the intersections of business and government. "What can I do for you?" "I need your help," Musk said. "The Evolution Initiative is gaining traction, but it's just an idea on a screen right now. We need to start bringing it to life, working with governments, businesses, and key influencers. I need someone who knows how to make things happen in the real world." Jacob was silent for a moment. "You're serious about this? You really want to change the system?" Musk nodded, even though Jacob couldn't see him. "We're not just changing one system, we're changing the way people think about systems. But to do that, we need to work within them first. I need you to help me get the right people on board." "I'll take care of it," Jacob said after a pause. "I'll start reaching out to the right people. If this thing's as big as you say, we'll need allies in all the right places." Musk felt a wave of relief. Getting the right connections was the next big step, and he knew Jacob could deliver. But even as he hung up the phone, he felt the weight of the challenge still hanging over him. The real work was just beginning. As he sat back, reflecting on the journey so far, Musk couldn't help but feel that they were on the verge of something monumental. The Evolution Initiative was more than just a platform, it was a movement. And now, it was time to make sure that movement didn't just stay online. It had to reach the real world. The spark had been lit. Now, it was time to fan the flames. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. Are you ready to be part of this change, or do you think it's all just talk? What's one issue you think needs to be tackled first, and why? As the Evolution Initiative continued to grow, it quickly became apparent that it wasn't just going to be a platform for progressive thinkers or those advocating for change, it was going to be a battleground. And like any battleground, it attracted a wide array of participants, each with their own agenda, beliefs, and sense of urgency. The proposals on the platform were becoming more complex, the debates more heated. Some users were calling for radical change, pushing for systems of governance that were completely decentralized. Others wanted to focus on incremental changes, believing that the current systems, though flawed, were capable of improvement. And then there were those who had doubts about the platform's ability to actually create real-world change, arguing that it was little more than a well-intentioned but ultimately naive experiment. Elon Musk had always known that shaking up the status quo would lead to friction. But what he hadn't anticipated was the ferocity of the opposition that would emerge. Mr. Musk, the press is calling this a social media revolution, Alex said, pacing back and forth in his office. But the backlash is already starting. Some influential figures are starting to label the platform as dangerous, a potential threat to democracy. They're calling it a populist experiment that undermines the very foundations of the legal system. Elon sighed. He had expected this, but the speed and intensity of the backlash were still surprising. He had seen the same thing happen when he proposed ambitious ideas at Tesla and SpaceX, but this time, it felt different. The stakes were higher. They'll call it dangerous until they realize it's inevitable, Musk said, his voice steady. All we're doing is giving people a space to be heard. But it's not just about voicing opinions. It's about action. If people see that, they'll stop seeing it as a threat. Alex looked doubtful. But what if they don't? What if this turns into something chaotic, something unmanageable? We can't control how people react. But we can control the platform itself. We can make sure the system remains transparent, accountable, and productive. If it's managed well, it will withstand the backlash. Despite his words, Musk couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease. It wasn't just the public opposition he was worried about, it was the potential for the platform to be hijacked by those with less noble intentions. The last thing he wanted was for the Evolution Initiative to become a breeding ground for misinformation or extremist ideologies. As the days passed, the backlash escalated. Prominent political figures began speaking out against the platform, arguing that it was a populist attempt to undermine the traditional checks and balances of democracy. Some even went as far as to suggest that the platform could be used to spread radical, dangerous ideas under the guise of open dialogue. The media, always eager for a new story, had a field day. Headlines blared warnings about the potential risks of crowdsourced legislation and public interference in the legal system. Some reports claimed that Musk's initiative could lead to anarchy if left unchecked. The critics were relentless, and the pressure was mounting. Musk had faced challenges before. Tesla's early days had been filled with skepticism, SpaceX had almost gone bankrupt more than once, but this felt different. The stakes were higher. The future of the Evolution Initiative wasn't just about one company's success, it was about whether the very concept of public involvement in governance could survive. He stood in front of his desk, staring at the glowing screen of his laptop, where the latest headlines were unfolding. The platform's user base was growing by the day, but so was the opposition. It was becoming clear that something had to change. "Alex, it's time for us to speak out," Musk said, breaking the silence. "We need to show people what we're really trying to do here. We need to explain why this isn't just about creating a platform for debate, it's about creating a system where people can actually have a say in shaping the future." Alex frowned. "You want to make a public statement? That could make things worse." "Better to be proactive than reactive," Musk replied, his voice firm. "We're not backing down. If we want this to work, we need to give people a clear picture of what we're doing." The following day, Musk scheduled a press conference. The room was packed with journalists, all eager to hear what the CEO of Tesla and SpaceX had to say about the growing controversy surrounding his new platform. Musk had always been comfortable in front of the camera, but this time, there was an intensity to the situation that made him pause for a moment before taking the stage. As he stood in front of the sea of reporters, his mind raced. He knew the weight of this moment. What he said next could make or break the evolution initiative. "Good afternoon," he began, his voice calm but resolute. "I want to take this opportunity to address the growing concerns surrounding the evolution initiative. I know there's been a lot of speculation, and I understand why some are questioning the platform's intentions. But I want to be clear, this is not about undermining democracy. It's about strengthening it." He paused, letting the words sink in before continuing. "For too long, we've relied on systems that were designed to be representative, but in many cases, they've become stagnant. People feel disconnected, unheard, and powerless. The Evolution Initiative was created to change that. We're not asking anyone to dismantle the system. We're asking for people to engage with it in new ways. We're asking for transparency, accountability, and collaboration. This platform is about giving people a voice, and giving that voice the power to actually create change." Musk's words hung in the air, and for a moment, the room was silent. He could feel the weight of every eye upon him. "But there's something else I need to say," he continued, his tone growing more intense. "The people who are attacking this platform, who are calling it dangerous, they're the same people who have profited from a system that has failed too many. The status quo has left too many people behind, and I'm not going to apologize for trying to fix that. The Evolution Initiative is not just an idea, it's a movement. And whether people like it or not, it's not going anywhere." As he finished speaking, the room erupted into a flurry of questions. But Elon didn't wait for them. He turned and walked off the stage, the weight of his words still echoing in the air. That night, Musk sat in his office, reflecting on what had just transpired. The press conference had gone well, better than he'd expected. He had been clear, direct, and unapologetic. But the battle was far from over. The backlash would continue, and the challenges would only grow more intense. But one thing was certain, the Evolution Initiative had taken its first real step into the public consciousness. The conversation had started. And now, it was up to Musk and his team to keep it going. As the sun began to set, Musk allowed himself a brief moment of peace. The journey ahead would be long, but for the first time, he felt that they were on the right path. The Evolution Initiative wasn't just about revolution, it was about evolution. And evolution was inevitable. The day after Elon's press conference, the news was everywhere. Headlines ranged from cautious optimism to outright condemnation, but one thing was clear, the Evolution Initiative was no longer just a fringe idea, it was a full-fledged movement, and it was making waves. Elon knew that the hard part was just beginning. While the platform's initial success was undeniable, maintaining its momentum would require more than just media attention, it would need to show real, tangible results. For the first time in a long time, Elon was beginning to feel the weight of leadership. This wasn't just about innovation in the tech world or space exploration. This was about changing the very structure of society itself. "We've got to stay ahead of the curve," Musk said, pacing around the conference room, where his core team had gathered for their weekly strategy meeting. "The opposition is only going to get louder. They're going to find new ways to undermine this initiative. We need to stay on top of the platform's growth and start moving some of these ideas into the real world." Alex, who had been scanning a series of new user-submitted proposals, nodded. "I'm seeing a lot of great ideas, but they're all in the early stages. We need to focus on the ones with the most potential to make a real-world impact. We can't afford to let everything go viral. We need a filtering system." Elon nodded, rubbing his chin thoughtfully. "We need a strategy for identifying the ideas that matter. What if we put together a council of experts from various fields, law, economics, health, education, and let them vet the proposals?" Alex raised an eyebrow. You're thinking of a steering committee, of sorts. Exactly, Musk replied. We can bring in the brightest minds from across industries. They can help us determine which proposals have real merit and which ones are just noise. We'll have a system of checks and balances from within the platform itself. The team began to hash out the logistics, but Elon could sense something looming. While the platform had generated immense interest, it had also attracted a vocal group of critics who were beginning to gain traction. Politicians, pundits, and even some business leaders were starting to frame the evolution initiative as a threat to the traditional order. One article in a major national newspaper was particularly scathing, titled, "Elon Musk's Dangerous Experiment, Crowdsourcing Lawmaking is a Recipe for Chaos." The piece claimed that a system designed to allow ordinary people to propose and vote on legislation was anathema to the very concept of a stable society. While the article acknowledged that public engagement in politics was important, it argued that decision-making should remain in the hands of trained professionals who understood the nuances of governance. Musk didn't mind the critics. What bothered him was the narrative taking shape around the platform, that it was a reckless gamble that would only lead to disaster. If the evolution initiative was to succeed, he knew they had to demonstrate that they weren't just creating chaos, they were fostering meaningful change. That evening, Musk took a rare break and sat in his favorite chair, staring out the window of his office overlooking the city. He thought about his early days at Tesla and SpaceX. He'd faced incredible skepticism at both companies, but they had been driven by tangible goals, electric cars and reusable rockets. What was the goal here, though? Was it really as simple as getting people to vote on proposals? Or was there something deeper, something that could fundamentally change how society viewed governance itself? As he sat there, lost in thought, his phone buzzed. It was a text message from Jacob, his old contact from the corporate world. Got some good news, the message read. I've lined up a meeting with a group of key players. Some of them are from top law firms, others from major corporations. They're interested in discussing how we can move the evolution initiative forward. But they want to hear more about how it works and what your plan is. Elon smiled to himself. This was the breakthrough he needed. If he could get influential players on board, it would lend the initiative a sense of legitimacy that would be impossible to ignore. Tell them I'll be there, Musk typed back. Let's see if we can get this thing off the ground. The next day, Elon flew to New York to meet with the group Jacob had assembled. As he sat in the sleek, modern conference room, he could feel the tension in the air. These weren't just any business leaders, they were some of the most powerful figures in the legal and corporate worlds. They had the power to make or break the evolution initiative. Jacob stood at the front of the room, setting the stage for the discussion. Thank you all for coming, he began. I know there are a lot of questions surrounding Elon's vision, but we're here today to see if we can find common ground. The evolution initiative isn't just about technology, it's about creating a new framework for how people interact with the systems that govern their lives. One of the corporate leaders, a woman in her mid-40s with sharp features, leaned forward. I'll be frank, Elon. I understand the appeal of crowdsourced innovation, but crowdsourced lawmaking? That's a very different beast. What makes you think this could work? Elon leaned back in his chair, his eyes steady. I don't think the platform will replace the traditional system. But it can complement it. By creating an environment where people can propose and discuss ideas, we're opening the door for more innovative solutions, solutions that might never be considered by the current political elite. The steering committee we're putting together will ensure that only viable ideas make it to the real-world application stage. Another man, a senior partner at a major law firm, raised his hand. What about regulation? How do we ensure that these ideas don't undermine existing laws or create unintended consequences? Elon nodded. That's exactly why we need experts involved. The ideas that gain traction will be vetted by people who understand the intricacies of the law. We're not throwing out the rulebook, we're giving it a facelift. The conversation continued for hours, with each person raising their concerns and probing the finer details of Musk's plan. By the end of the meeting, there was still a great deal of skepticism, but there was also a sense of cautious optimism. For the first time, Elon felt like he was getting through to these influential figures. They might not all be on board yet, but they were listening. As he left the meeting, Jacob walked with him down the hallway. "That went better than I expected." "I think they're starting to see it," Musk replied. "But we've still got a long way to go." Back in the office, Elon looked out the window once again, his thoughts racing. The Evolution Initiative had passed an important test, but it was just the beginning. There were still so many hurdles to overcome. And there were still so many people who didn't believe in what he was doing. But as he thought about the meeting, he realized one thing: the world was changing. People were beginning to see that they didn't have to accept the status quo. They could be part of the solution. And that was the most powerful thing of all. In the days that followed the pivotal meeting in New York, Elon Musk found himself both energized and uneasy. There had been progress, significant progress, but it felt as though they were standing at the edge of something vast and unknown. The Evolution Initiative was evolving, but so were the challenges it faced. Back at the office, Elon convened his core team again. The feedback from the meeting was mostly positive, but there were still significant hurdles. For one, the political elite remained largely hostile to the platform, dismissing it as a fringe idea or a naive experiment. And then there was the more subtle resistance, the kind that worked behind the scenes, quietly undermining the platform's credibility, slowly eroding trust among potential supporters. "We've got to be ready for the attack that's coming," Elon said, pacing in front of the room. "The opposition won't just fight us openly. They're going to work in the shadows, trying to discredit the platform and sow doubt among our users." Alex, who had been monitoring the platform's activity, nodded. "We've already seen a few coordinated disinformation campaigns targeting the platform. The social media narratives are getting more sophisticated. It's not just trolls anymore. These are organized efforts to cast doubt on the initiative's legitimacy." Elon grimaced. "I expected this. It's like when Tesla was first starting out, no one believed in it. But we have to stay ahead of the curve. We need to be proactive, not reactive." Suddenly, a new alert popped up on Alex's screen. His expression darkened as he clicked through the notification. "It's happening," Alex muttered. "There's a new smear campaign brewing, this time with a legal angle. Someone's framing the Evolution Initiative as a potential constitutional crisis, claiming it violates the principles of representative democracy." Elon stepped forward and looked over Alex's shoulder. The article was a scathing critique of the platform's model, written by a former constitutional law professor who had ties to several political organizations that were publicly opposed to the platform. "This is bad," Elon said, his voice low. "They're not just attacking us as a business. They're attacking the core of what we're trying to do. If this spreads, it could kill the whole initiative." "We need to address it immediately," Alex replied. "But we also need to stay calm. If we respond too aggressively, it'll look like we're on the defensive. We need to be strategic." Elon nodded. "Strategic, yes. But we also need to show that we're not afraid to take this head-on. We're not doing anything illegal. We're just trying to give people more control over their own futures." The next few days were a whirlwind of meetings, both internal and external. Elon spent hours on the phone with lawyers, political consultants, and even some members of the press, trying to get a handle on the growing storm. He had to be careful with his responses. Every word could be twisted into something that fueled the narrative the opposition was trying to create. But as the tension mounted, Elon started to notice something that gave him pause. The smear campaigns weren't just coming from political adversaries. They were also being fueled by high-powered corporate interests, companies with a stake in the status quo, ones that stood to lose if the Evolution Initiative succeeded. These were the unseen enemies, the ones who didn't attack publicly but instead worked behind the scenes, trying to pull strings and sabotage the platform's credibility. Elon had always known that his ventures would face resistance from entrenched powers. But this felt different. This was bigger. This was more than just a battle of ideas, it was a fight for control of the very systems that govern society. And if the Evolution Initiative was going to survive, it would need to find a way to neutralize these shadow forces. "We need to hit back," Elon said, his voice steely. "But not in the way they expect. Let's expose the players behind these attacks." Alex looked up from his laptop, concerned. "You're suggesting we go after them publicly? That's a dangerous game, Elon." "I'm not suggesting we play dirty," Elon said, pacing. "But we need to shine a light on who's behind this. We have to expose the corporate interests that are pulling the strings. If we can show people the real motivations behind these attacks, they'll see it for what it is, a desperate attempt to protect an outdated system." Alex hesitated. "We've always been transparent, but going after these people could make things uglier. It could escalate the situation." "It's already escalated," Musk said. "And if we don't take action, we risk losing control of the narrative. We're not just fighting for our platform, we're fighting for the future of governance itself." Over the next few weeks, Musk and his team put together a counter-strategy. They dug deeper into the financial connections between the critics of the Evolution Initiative and some of the biggest corporations in the country. It wasn't easy, many of the connections were obscure, hidden behind layers of shell companies and lobbyist groups, but Musk's team had the resources to track them down. The results were shocking. There were direct links between several prominent law firms and large tech corporations, all of whom had substantial stakes in maintaining the current political structure. Some of these firms had close relationships with the very politicians who had been leading the charge against the Evolution Initiative. It was a tangled web of influence, money, and power. Elon knew that this revelation could be a game-changer. But it had to be handled delicately. If they made the wrong move, it could backfire. The last thing they wanted was to alienate potential allies or give ammunition to their critics. After consulting with legal experts, the team decided to release the findings in a controlled, methodical way. They wouldn't make broad accusations or attack individuals directly. Instead, they would present the facts, a series of well-researched reports outlining the connections between the critics and the corporate interests that stood to lose from the Evolution Initiative's success. The goal wasn't to play dirty, it was to expose the truth. The day the report was released, the media landscape shifted once again. The narrative began to change, slowly at first, but then with increasing momentum. The public was starting to see the attacks on the Evolution Initiative not as legitimate concerns, but as part of a larger campaign to protect the status quo. Slowly, the tide began to turn in Elon's favor. It wasn't a victory yet, but it was a step in the right direction. The platform was still facing immense challenges, and the opposition was far from finished. But for the first time in weeks, Elon felt like they were finally gaining some ground. "We've got them on the ropes," Alex said, looking at the growing public support for the platform. "Now we just need to keep the pressure on." Elon smiled faintly. "We're not out of the woods yet. But we're closer than we've ever been." As the team prepared for the next phase of the initiative, Musk sat back for a moment, reflecting on how far they had come. The Evolution Initiative was no longer just a platform for debate, it was becoming a force to be reckoned with. And that was just the beginning. Elon Musk sat at his desk, looking at the latest polling data and the flood of messages that had come in over the past few days. The Evolution Initiative was gaining traction, no doubt about it. But with that traction came a new level of scrutiny, and the pressure was starting to feel heavier by the day. The media coverage was relentless, and the growing divide between supporters and detractors was becoming impossible to ignore. The backlash had taken on a new form. There were organized protests against the initiative in major cities, with critics accusing Musk of trying to destabilize democracy itself. Some were even questioning the legitimacy of the initiative, citing concerns that it could be manipulated by hidden agendas. The platform that had once seemed like a bright beacon of change was now being painted as a dangerous experiment. The challenge was no longer just about getting people to embrace the idea, it was about weathering the storm that came with it. "We need to do something to stabilize public opinion," Alex said during a meeting in the conference room. "The backlash is starting to take on a life of its own. We can't just keep responding defensively." Elon leaned back in his chair, his hands folded across his chest. "I know. But the thing is, we're not doing anything wrong. We're not trying to undermine democracy. We're trying to improve it. We're giving people the power to shape their own future. We need to frame the conversation in those terms," Alex continued. "But we also need to have a visible plan for addressing the concerns that are mounting. People want to know how this will work long-term, not just in theory." Elon nodded. He had known the risks when he started this initiative. After all, people had always been skeptical of radical ideas that challenged the established order. But this felt different. This wasn't just a business venture or an innovation in technology. This was a societal shift, and society, it seemed, wasn't always ready for change. That night, Elon took a rare moment to himself, stepping out onto the balcony of his penthouse apartment. The city sprawled below him, the twinkling lights a constant reminder of how much was at stake. He thought back to the early days of Tesla and SpaceX, the times when both companies were teetering on the brink of collapse, when failure seemed imminent, but they had somehow found a way to keep going. The resistance had been fierce back then, too, but he had pushed through. He had to believe that the same could happen with the Evolution Initiative. But this felt different. This time, it wasn't just a question of building a better product or service, it was a question of changing the very fabric of society. And that kind of change didn't happen overnight. It took time. It took perseverance. And it took the right kind of leadership. Elon turned his thoughts to the team. They had worked tirelessly to bring this idea to life, and now it was up to him to keep them motivated through the uncertainty. If he faltered, they would falter. The pressure was enormous, but he couldn't let it break him. The future depended on this. The next day, Elon and his team prepared for what was going to be one of the most important events in the Evolution Initiative's history, a live town hall event streamed across the platform. It was an opportunity for Musk to speak directly to the public, to address their concerns and outline the next steps for the platform. It was also a chance for him to demonstrate that the initiative was more than just an abstract idea, it was a movement with a concrete plan for improving governance. The event was scheduled for late in the afternoon. As the time neared, Elon stood backstage, reviewing his notes one last time. He could hear the buzz of the audience just beyond the curtains. His mind raced with thoughts of the opposition, of the critics who would be watching, waiting for him to slip up. This was his chance to show them that the Evolution Initiative wasn't just a pipe dream, it was real, and it was here to stay. As the camera crew counted down, Elon took a deep breath and stepped onto the stage, greeted by the applause of the crowd. He raised a hand to acknowledge them, then began speaking. "Thank you all for being here today. It's been a wild ride so far, hasn't it? The Evolution Initiative has sparked some of the most important conversations of our time. And while the path ahead is uncertain, I believe that the people of this country are ready to take control of their future." The crowd cheered again, but Elon could sense the skepticism that still lingered. It was in the way some of the audience members looked at him, the way they clung to their doubts even as they applauded. This wasn't going to be an easy sell. But he was used to fighting uphill battles. "I know there are a lot of questions about how this works," he continued. "Some of you are wondering, how can crowdsourced lawmaking actually function in a system that has relied on traditional governance for centuries? How do we ensure that the voices of everyday people are heard without chaos or confusion?" Elon paused, letting the question hang in the air. "The answer is simple," he said. "The Evolution Initiative isn't here to replace the system, it's here to enhance it. The platform is designed to allow people to propose, debate, and vote on issues that matter to them. But we're not doing this without oversight. We've assembled a team of experts in law, economics, and public policy to ensure that the proposals we support are viable, legal, and sustainable. He could see some of the skepticism begin to fade. The critics had painted the platform as a chaotic experiment, but Musk was framing it as a solution, a balanced, practical approach to modernizing governance. He pressed on. "And we're not doing this alone," he said. "The public isn't just a passive participant in this process. We're building a coalition of experts and thought leaders who will help shape this platform into something that works for everyone. This is about democracy, true democracy, not the kind that's decided by lobbyists and special interests, but the kind where every voice matters." Elon's words seemed to resonate with the audience, but as he continued, he could hear the familiar voices of the opposition beginning to stir. His team had warned him that this was inevitable. Critics would never stop fighting this idea, no matter how much progress they made. But he wasn't backing down. The idea had a life of its own now, and it wasn't just his to control, it belonged to the people. As the event wrapped up, Elon stood backstage again, catching his breath. The town hall had gone well, but he knew that the real work was only just beginning. The opposition was still out there, waiting for any misstep, any sign of weakness. But Elon wasn't going to let that stop him. He had a vision. And he was willing to fight for it, no matter how long it took. The day after the town hall, the Evolution Initiative's platform was flooded with messages, both positive and negative. Musk and his team had known this would happen, but the sheer volume of responses was staggering. The event had sparked a wave of hope among the supporters, yet it had also solidified the resolve of the opposition. As expected, the critics were quick to mobilize, using the platform's momentum as fuel for their attacks. Elon sat in his office, scrolling through the articles that had been published since the town hall. Some of the headlines were benign, but others were much more pointed. One article in particular stood out. "Is Elon Musk's democracy a disguise for corporate control?" The piece, written by a political pundit with connections to several large media outlets, was an attack on the core principles of the Evolution Initiative. It painted Musk as a billionaire trying to manipulate the political system for his own gain, turning the initiative into a way to push his own agenda under the guise of giving power back to the people. Elon leaned back in his chair, frustration building. He had anticipated the attacks, but seeing it laid out in such a calculated manner made it feel all the more personal. The narrative that he was trying to hijack democracy for corporate interests was one that he knew he had to dismantle. But the problem was, the critics had learned from their previous mistakes. They weren't just going after Musk now, they were targeting the initiative as a whole, painting it as a dangerous experiment that threatened the stability of society. In the following days, the attacks became more organized. Opposition groups began to ramp up their efforts, both online and offline. Protests were scheduled in several major cities, with signs and chants denouncing the platform. The opposition wasn't just about rhetoric anymore, it was becoming a movement in its own right. And this movement was not only vocal, it was gaining the attention of lawmakers and influencers who were beginning to speak out against the initiative. "I knew it wasn't going to be easy," Elon said during a strategy meeting with Alex and the rest of his core team. "But this is a lot more aggressive than I anticipated." Alex nodded, scrolling through the latest social media trends. They'd been building momentum for weeks, but now it's like they've tapped into something bigger. The media has picked up on it, and it's snowballing. One of the advisors, a seasoned political strategist named Carol, spoke up. "It's not just the protests. Some high-ranking senators are starting to raise concerns. They're framing this as a challenge to the very fabric of American democracy. They've found a narrative that resonates with their base, and they're running with it." Elon rubbed his temples, thinking carefully. "We need to take this head-on. If we keep responding to each attack individually, we'll just play defense. What we need is a unified message, a clear, compelling vision of what we're trying to accomplish here." Carol agreed. "We have to shift the conversation. It's not about defending the platform, it's about explaining why it's necessary. Why it's the future of governance. If we can get people to see that, they'll rally behind us." Elon stood up from his desk, determination settling in. "We're not just proposing a new way of doing things. We're offering something far bigger, an opportunity for the people to actually control their future. This is about reclaiming power from the hands of the few and putting it back in the hands of the many. And that's a message we need to own." That afternoon, Musk made a decision. He would address the growing opposition directly, but not through conventional means. Instead of a speech or another town hall, he decided to take to the platform in a more personal way, by engaging directly with the critics. The next day, Musk posted a video on the Evolution Initiative's platform. It was a bold move. He knew it would stir the pot even more, but he was ready for it. The video started with Elon standing in a simple, minimalist setting, a far cry from the polished, corporate environments he was usually associated with. He looked directly into the camera, his expression serious. "I know there are a lot of concerns about the Evolution Initiative," he began. "There are people who believe that what we're trying to do here is dangerous, that it will undermine democracy and destabilize society. I get it. Change is scary, and when you challenge the way things have always been done, people will push back. But here's the truth, we're not trying to replace the system. We're trying to improve it." Elon paused, letting the words sink in. Democracy is supposed to be about the people. But for too long, the people have been sidelined, ignored by politicians who make decisions behind closed doors, by corporations who pull the strings. We built the Evolution Initiative to give people a real voice, a platform where their voices matter, where they can help shape the laws and policies that affect their lives. And yes, that's a big change. But it's a change that's needed. He leaned forward slightly, his tone becoming more impassioned. This is about the future of our society. It's about giving power back to the people, where it belongs. If that scares you, then maybe it's time to ask why. The video ended, and the response was immediate. The comments section exploded, with supporters flooding the platform with messages of encouragement and new users signing up at a rate they hadn't seen in days. The critics, of course, came out in full force too, calling the video a desperate attempt to defend an untenable idea. But what struck Elon the most was the sheer number of undecided people who had joined the conversation. For the first time in a while, he felt as if the narrative was shifting in his favor. He wasn't just defending the Evolution Initiative anymore, he was taking ownership of the conversation. And that made all the difference. Later that evening, as the media continued to cover the video, Elon sat in his office again, reflecting on what had just happened. The immediate feedback had been overwhelming, but he knew that this was just the beginning of a much longer battle. The opposition was fierce, and they weren't going to give up easily. But he also knew one thing, the Evolution Initiative was more than just a platform. It was an idea whose time had come. And no amount of opposition, no matter how fierce, could change that. The weeks that followed Elon's direct address to the critics were a blur of activity. The backlash continued to rage, but there was an undeniable shift in the tide. Supporters were rallying, and the numbers on the Evolution Initiative's platform continued to rise, despite the sustained opposition. What had once been a fledgling idea now seemed poised to alter the fabric of democracy itself. Still, the critics weren't backing down. If anything, they were becoming more aggressive in their opposition. The mainstream media continued to cover the initiative with suspicion, and public protests escalated. In Washington, political figures who had been silent were now voicing their concerns about the potential dangers of crowdsourced governance. "I'm telling you, Elon, they're not letting up," Alex said, pacing back and forth in Elon's office. "We need to counter their narrative more effectively. The media is still painting us as a threat." Elon leaned back in his chair, his hands folded. "I know. But I think we're starting to make headway. The video response was huge. It's starting to shift the public perception. We just need to keep pushing forward. Alex wasn't convinced. It's not enough to just push forward. We need a plan to neutralize the attacks. A unified approach, not just a series of isolated responses. Elon thought about it for a moment. He had always operated in the gray areas of business and technology, taking risks when others hesitated. But this was different. This wasn't just about innovation, this was about altering the core of how governance worked. And the stakes had never been higher. We'll do more than just respond, Elon said, a spark of inspiration lighting up his face. We're going to take the initiative, literally. I've been thinking about this for a while. It's time to double down. That night, Elon called an emergency meeting with the Evolution Initiative's leadership team. The room was filled with a palpable sense of urgency, everyone aware that the initiative had reached a critical juncture. We need to take the conversation beyond just the platform, Elon began, his voice steady but commanding. We need to show people that this isn't just an abstract idea. This is something that can work in the real world. We're not just fighting for votes, we're fighting for a new kind of governance. The Evolution Initiative is bigger than any one person, it's bigger than me. He paused, looking around the room at the faces of his team. So, here's what we're going to do. We're going to propose the first crowdsourced law. A real one. One that will submit to Congress. Something that will make people realize this is not just an experiment, this is the future of democracy. A murmur rippled through the room. It was an audacious move, one that would put the platform's promises to the test like never before. The proposal would be the perfect way to showcase the power of crowdsourced lawmaking, and Elon knew that if they succeeded, it would be a game changer. Are we ready for this? Alex asked, his brow furrowed. If this goes wrong, it could give our critics the ammunition they need. Elon's gaze never wavered. We don't back down. We show them that the people have a voice that matters. We'll draft the proposal, have it reviewed by experts, and submit it to Congress. If they reject it, they're rejecting democracy itself. And if they approve it, then we've made history. Over the next few weeks, the Evolution Initiative's team worked around the clock, drafting a proposal for the first crowdsourced law. The process was painstaking, with multiple rounds of review and edits. They wanted to make sure that it was not only legally sound but also practical and beneficial to society. The proposed law was designed to address one of the most contentious issues in America at the time, universal healthcare. It wasn't a perfect solution, but it was a starting point, a plan to ensure that every American had access to basic healthcare, regardless of income, through a combination of public and private options. The law included provisions for oversight and accountability, ensuring that it couldn't be hijacked by special interests. By the time they were ready to submit it, Elon felt the weight of what they were about to do. If this proposal was accepted, it could signal the beginning of a new era for the Evolution Initiative and for democracy itself. But if it was rejected, the initiative might never recover. On the day of the submission, Elon addressed the nation once again, this time through a live broadcast. He was calm but resolute, as he stood in front of the camera, the weight of the moment heavy on his shoulders. Today, we take the next step in the Evolution Initiative, he began. We are submitting our first crowdsourced law to Congress, an effort by the people, for the people. This law represents our belief in the power of the public to shape their own future, to make decisions that impact their lives. It's not perfect, but it's a start. It's a start that we believe will change the way we govern, forever. Elon paused, taking a deep breath. We're not doing this because we think we have all the answers. We're doing this because we believe in the people. We believe in the wisdom of the crowd. And we believe that this is just the beginning. As soon as the broadcast ended, the response was immediate. News outlets covered the submission extensively, with some heralding it as a bold step forward for democracy and others warning of the risks involved. The debate quickly moved from the realm of abstract theory to real-world implications. In Washington, Congress was divided. Some lawmakers supported the initiative, seeing it as an opportunity to modernize governance, while others decried it as a dangerous overreach. The next few weeks would be a test not just for the evolution initiative but for the very concept of crowdsourced lawmaking. The critics, of course, were quick to respond, painting the submission as a publicity stunt. But even they couldn't ignore the growing number of people who were willing to give the initiative a chance. The momentum was building, and it was clear that the battle was far from over. But for the first time, Elon felt that the tide was starting to turn in their favor. The weeks following the submission of the crowdsourced law proposal were a whirlwind. The nation watched with bated breath as the debate in Congress grew more intense. Public interest in the evolution initiative had reached a fever pitch, and the pressure on both sides of the argument was mounting. Elon found himself in the spotlight more than ever. Every word, every move, was scrutinized. Every statement was dissected by pundits, and every tweet became a headline. Some were calling him a visionary, a hero who was pushing the boundaries of democracy. Others saw him as a dangerous innovator, someone who was attempting to remake the entire political system for his own gain. He spent his days in meetings with lawyers, political analysts, and his closest advisors, trying to navigate the shifting tides. One day, the stakes felt higher than ever. The next, it seemed like the walls were closing in. But through it all, Elon kept his focus on the larger goal, the vision of a truly democratic future, where the people had control. The media coverage was relentless. The debates between the initiative supporters and critics dominated news cycles, filling TV screens and newspapers. The narrative surrounding the crowdsourced law had evolved. No longer was it just a proposal, it was a symbol of everything the evolution initiative stood for. But with this new level of attention came even more scrutiny. Opposition groups grew louder, organizing protests in cities across the country. Signs reading, "No to Musk's dictatorship," and "People over profit," were common at rallies, and the protests became a focal point for those who felt that the evolution initiative was a threat to the very fabric of democracy. Meanwhile, the more conservative politicians in Washington saw the crowdsourced law proposal as a step too far. They decried it as an experiment that could unravel years of political tradition. A group of Republican senators publicly stated their opposition, calling for a full investigation into the motivations behind the proposal. "This is not democracy," one senator, William Hartman, said in a televised interview. "This is a billionaire trying to play God with the future of the nation. We cannot, and we will not, allow this to happen." The evolution initiative had become a battleground, and the entire country seemed to be taking sides. Despite the mounting opposition, there were signs of growing support for the proposal. A poll conducted by a major news outlet revealed that nearly 40% of the American public supported the idea of crowdsourced lawmaking, with another 25% expressing interest in seeing how it would play out. While this number wasn't enough to guarantee success, it was a significant shift in public opinion. Elon knew the battle wasn't over yet, but the growing support was a clear indication that the tide was turning. The idea of a more participatory democracy, one where ordinary citizens could have a direct say in the laws that governed their lives, was resonating with more and more people. Even some lawmakers, previously opposed to the initiative, had begun to change their stance, arguing that it was a chance to reform a broken system. As Elon sat in his office, reviewing the latest poll numbers, Alex walked in with a grim expression on his face. "Elon, we need to talk," Alex said, his voice low. Elon looked up. "What's going on?" "It's the opposition," Alex said. "They've upped their game. A new, coordinated effort is underway. They're not just attacking us, they're trying to undermine the credibility of the platform itself. There's talk of investigating whether we've been manipulating data or using unfair tactics to boost our numbers." Elon's eyes narrowed. "That's just more of the same fear-mongering. They know they're losing ground, so they're going for the low blows." "I'm not so sure," Alex said. I've seen the documents, they've got some heavy hitters backing them up. There's a real effort to discredit the entire initiative, and they're pushing hard. Elon took a deep breath. The pressure was intensifying, but he wasn't about to back down now. He leaned forward, eyes burning with determination. Then we fight back. We can't let them control the narrative. We need to keep pushing the message that this isn't about me, it's about the people. We need to remind the public of why we're doing this in the first place. The next few days saw a flurry of activity. The Evolution Initiative's legal team prepared responses to the allegations, while the communications team worked on a counteroffensive. Elon, as always, took a direct role in the strategy, insisting that they needed to focus on the positive vision of the initiative, rather than engaging in a back-and-forth with the critics. Then came a moment that would change everything. It happened during a live televised debate between Elon Musk and William Hartman, the senator who had become the most vocal critic of the Evolution Initiative. The debate had been set up by a major news network as a way to allow both sides to present their arguments. Musk was calm and collected as he sat across from Hartman, who seemed more agitated with each passing minute. "Mr. Musk," Hartman said, his voice dripping with sarcasm, "you claim to be empowering the people, but all you're doing is creating a platform for chaos. You're trying to bypass the system that's worked for centuries. You're not saving democracy, you're threatening it." Elon leaned forward slightly, his gaze steady. "Senator, with all due respect, the system that's worked for centuries hasn't been working for most people. We have a government that's controlled by special interests and elites. A system where the average person has little to no say in the decisions that directly affect their lives. This isn't about chaos, it's about fairness." Hartman scoffed. "Fairness? You want to take power away from elected officials and give it to the masses? You think people, ordinary citizens, are equipped to make the tough decisions that need to be made? That's reckless." Elon didn't flinch. "I think the masses are more equipped to make decisions than the small group of people who have held power for decades. Our system is broken. It's time for a change." The debate was a turning point. For the first time, Elon's calm, rational argument cut through the noise. Hartman's aggressive approach only served to make him appear out of touch with the reality many Americans were facing. The audience, who had been split up until that point, began to lean more in Elon's favor. The debate became a media sensation, with pundits on both sides commenting on the unexpected outcome. While Hartman had come out swinging, it was Elon's measured, vision-focused responses that seemed to win the day. The following day, the Evolution Initiative saw a huge spike in sign-ups. The momentum was shifting. Public opinion was starting to turn, and it was clear that the critics had underestimated the appeal of Musk's vision. The storm was far from over, but for the first time, Elon felt the tides turning in his favor. It was no longer about defending the platform, it was about showing the world that the Evolution Initiative wasn't just a political experiment. It was a revolution. The media frenzy around the debate had been intense, but it was nothing compared to the whirlwind that followed. Elon Musk had not just held his own against Senator Hartman, he had turned the tables. In the days after the debate, public support for the Evolution Initiative surged. People from all walks of life were now engaging in discussions about the future of democracy, and many of them were beginning to see the flaws in the traditional system. Elon's victory in the debate felt like a turning point, a sign that the tide was truly shifting in their favor. But even as he reveled in the growing support, he knew the fight was far from over. The opposition wasn't going to give up without a fight. Back in Washington, the backlash from the political establishment grew even more intense. Behind closed doors, members of Congress who had been on the fence about the crowdsourced law proposal were now becoming more vocal in their opposition. The threats of investigations, smear campaigns, and legal challenges grew louder. It was clear that they weren't just concerned about the future of the law, they were scared of what the Evolution Initiative represented, a challenge to their power and control. Elon wasn't naive. He knew that the entrenched political elites would stop at nothing to maintain their hold on power. But he had also seen the momentum that was building. The people were speaking up, and the platform's growing user base was demanding that their voices be heard. As the pressure mounted, Elon gathered his team for a strategy meeting. He knew that they couldn't afford to take their foot off the gas. The stakes were higher than ever. "We need to push forward with everything we've got," Elon said, his voice firm as he addressed his inner circle. "The proposal is in Congress, but we can't just sit back and wait. We need to engage the public on a deeper level. We need to make sure they understand what's at stake here. This is more than just a law, it's about the future of democracy itself." Alex nodded, his face grim. "I agree. But we need to be prepared for the opposition to pull out all the stops. They're going to attack us harder than ever before. They'll accuse us of everything from manipulating data to trying to install a dictatorship." Elon's eyes narrowed. "Let them. We know what we're doing, and the people know what we're doing. We need to stay focused on the bigger picture." It wasn't long before the critics ramped up their efforts. A new wave of negative media coverage flooded the airwaves, with reports claiming that the Evolution Initiative's platform was being used to manipulate public opinion. Investigative journalists dug into every aspect of the platform's operations, questioning the security of the data and the transparency of the decision-making process. One evening, Elon sat down with a group of his closest advisors to review the latest developments. The news was grim. The opposition had launched a full-scale campaign to discredit the crowdsourced law proposal. There were rumors circulating that members of Congress were preparing to introduce legislation that would prevent platforms like the Evolution Initiative from having any say in public lawmaking. "This is getting out of hand," Alex said, frustration evident in his voice. "They're trying to control the narrative, and it's working. We need a new strategy, and fast." Elon thought for a moment, then looked up with a glint of determination in his eyes. "We fight back with transparency. We let the people see exactly how the platform works, how decisions are made, how votes are counted. We give them full access to the process." Alex raised an eyebrow. "You're suggesting we make everything public?" "Exactly," Elon replied. "The more open we are, the harder it is for them to spin this as some kind of corrupt, behind-the-scenes operation. We can't let them paint us as the bad guys anymore. We need to prove that this is the people's movement." The decision to open up the platform's inner workings was a risky one, but it was also a bold statement of confidence. Within days, the Evolution Initiative released a full, unfiltered report on how the crowdsourced law was being crafted, including a breakdown of the data used to create the proposal, the decision-making algorithms, and a full list of the advisors and experts who had been consulted throughout the process. The transparency was a gamble, but it paid off. The media outlets that had once been critical of the initiative began to shift their tone. Journalists, who had once painted Elon as a tech mogul trying to game the system, now found themselves with nothing to criticize but the politics of the opposing side. The very act of exposing the platform's inner workings humanized the Evolution Initiative in the eyes of the public. It showed them that this wasn't some corporate takeover, but a movement driven by people who genuinely wanted to create change. Even Senator Hartman, who had been leading the charge against the initiative, found himself struggling to maintain the same level of opposition. The public backlash against his stance was growing, and the media began to portray him as out of touch with the will of the people. But the battle wasn't over. As the proposal moved closer to a vote in Congress, the opposition's efforts only became more intense. They dug in their heels, throwing everything they could at the crowdsourced law in an attempt to derail it. Negative ads flooded TV screens, warning that the initiative would lead to chaos and instability. Political pundits claimed that the crowdsourced law would be the downfall of America's democracy, painting it as an invitation for mobs to control the government. But in the face of these attacks, the support for the Evolution Initiative remained strong. The idea that the people should have a direct say in the laws that govern them was gaining traction. The crowdsourcing model, once viewed as a novelty, was now being seen as a serious solution to the failures of traditional politics. As the vote drew nearer, Elon knew that the fight was coming to a head. The next few days would determine whether or not the crowdsourced law proposal would become a reality. But no matter the outcome, he was proud of what they had accomplished. The Evolution Initiative had sparked a conversation that the country had needed for a long time. And for the first time in decades, the people were beginning to believe that they could shape their own future. The tipping point had arrived. The final countdown to the vote had begun. Across the country, tensions were running high. The Evolution Initiative, once a bold experiment, had now become a battle for the future of democracy itself. With each passing day, the stakes seemed to grow higher. The public was engaged, the media was invested, and the political world was on edge. It had become clear that this was not just a policy proposal, it was a moment of reckoning. Elon Musk sat at the head of a conference table in his office, surrounded by his closest advisors. There was an air of anticipation in the room, but also a sense of anxiety. They were on the verge of something monumental, but the uncertainty of the outcome was impossible to ignore. "We've done everything we can," Elon said, his voice calm but resolute. "The platform is open, the people are engaged, and we've fought back against every attack. Now it's in Congress's hands." Alex, ever the strategist, shifted in his seat, his face tense. "It's not just Congress, Elon. The opposition is still strong. Some of the most powerful lobbyists in the country are working behind the scenes to block the vote. They're trying to swing the final vote in their favor by any means necessary." Elon nodded. He had anticipated this. He had known from the beginning that this fight wouldn't be easy. The political establishment was not going to give up without a final, desperate push. But he wasn't about to back down now. "We can't control what they do behind closed doors, but we can control our message. We've built something powerful here, something that's not about any one person or any one group of elites. This is about the people," Elon said, his voice steady. "And that's what we need to keep reminding them." Across the country, the conversations were heating up. Social media was flooded with people weighing in on the crowdsourced law proposal. Supporters of the initiative shared posts, wrote articles, and even organized rallies to show their support. Meanwhile, the opposition was doing everything in its power to discourage people from backing the plan. The final few days before the vote were a blur of activity. Elon was constantly on the move, meeting with lawmakers, addressing the media, and rallying the troops. His social media posts were filled with calls for action, encouraging people to reach out to their representatives and demand that they support the Evolution Initiative. But even with all the momentum, there were moments when Elon felt the weight of the situation pressing down on him. He had come this far, but what if it wasn't enough? What if, after everything, the political establishment had too much power? What if the vote was rigged, or the forces opposing the initiative were simply too strong? He shook those thoughts away. This was bigger than him. It had always been bigger than him. This was a chance to reshape democracy, to give people the power to shape the laws that governed their lives. And no matter the outcome, he would not let fear stand in his way. On the morning of the vote, the nation was gripped by an electric sense of anticipation. News outlets carried constant coverage of the final vote count, with live updates and projections streaming across screens. As the day progressed, more and more representatives made their positions known. The lines were drawn, with some vocal supporters declaring their intention to vote in favor, while others stood firm in their opposition. In Congress, the debate was fiery. Members of the Senate and House of Representatives had been inundated with phone calls, emails, and social media messages from their constituents. The crowdsourced law had divided the nation, and now it seemed that every single representative would have to choose a side. Elon was in Washington, sitting in a small room with his legal team, watching the proceedings unfold on a screen. He had been in politics long enough to know that the outcome of a vote wasn't just about the numbers, it was about the perception. This was the moment when everything would either fall into place or come crashing down. Senator Hartman, once the loudest voice against the Evolution Initiative, took the floor. The crowd in the chamber was silent as he addressed the room. "The proposal before us today is nothing short of revolutionary," Hartman began, his voice strong and steady. "It claims to empower the people, but in reality, it's an attempt to undermine the very foundation of our democracy. If we pass this, we risk throwing away centuries of tradition, of the system that has worked, flawed as it may be, for all these years." His words were met with a mix of cheers and boos from the assembled crowd. Hartman's rhetoric had always been fierce, but it was clear that the tide had shifted. The public was no longer uniformly behind him. One by one, other members of Congress took their turns. Some supported the initiative, speaking passionately about the need for change and the promise of a more democratic future. Others vehemently opposed it, warning of the potential chaos and instability it could create. As the final speeches were made and the vote neared, it was clear that this wasn't going to be an easy decision for many. The chambers were filled with an uneasy silence, a sense of uncertainty hanging in the air. Finally, the moment arrived. The vote was called. The results were being tallied in real time, the numbers slowly ticking up on the screen. Elon's heart pounded in his chest. His team was tense, their eyes glued to the screen. At first, it was too close to call. But as the last votes came in, the tension in the room began to shift. Support for the Evolution Initiative was stronger than anyone had expected. As the final numbers flashed on the screen, it became clear, the crowdsourced law had passed. The room erupted in cheers and applause. Elon sat back in his chair, his heart racing. He had done it. They had done it. The Evolution Initiative was a reality. It was a moment of triumph, but also of reflection. The battle had been long and hard, and there were many who had fought tirelessly to make this moment happen. The fight wasn't over, there would be challenges ahead, and the implementation of the crowdsourced law would be an uphill battle. But for the first time in a long while, Elon felt the weight of what they had accomplished. It wasn't just a victory, it was a new beginning. As the celebrations began, Elon took a moment to step outside, standing on the steps of the Capitol building. He looked out over the crowd, feeling the cool breeze against his face. The world was changing. And for the first time in his life, he truly believed that the people were ready to take control of their own future. The revolution had begun. The weight of the moment settled in, and for a brief moment, everything seemed to pause. The decision had been made. The Evolution Initiative was no longer just a vision, it was now the law of the land. Across the nation, people were reacting in real time. Some were celebrating the triumph of democracy, while others were grappling with the reality of a new, uncharted future. Elon Musk stood outside the Capitol building, watching the crowds disperse after the vote. The cheers and applause had died down, but the excitement in the air lingered. He had been part of something historic, but this wasn't just about him. It was about the millions of voices who had rallied behind this idea, the people who had believed in the promise of direct democracy. Today, the world had changed. The immediate aftermath of the vote was a whirlwind. News outlets scrambled to cover the implications of the law's passage, while politicians and pundits continued to debate what it would mean for the future. Some celebrated the success of the crowdsourced process, hailing it as a groundbreaking step in the evolution of democratic governance. Others, especially the establishment's fiercest critics, feared that it would lead to chaos, divisiveness, and unpredictability. Elon, however, had his focus squarely on the next phase. The hard part wasn't over, it had only just begun. The real work would come in implementing the law and ensuring that it worked as intended. The platform had to be optimized, the people had to be educated, and the government had to adapt to a new way of operating. This wasn't just about passing a law, it was about creating a system that would empower people for generations to come. Elon's team worked tirelessly in the weeks that followed the vote. They fine-tuned the crowdsourced platform, ensuring that it was secure, transparent, and user-friendly. Data analysts and engineers worked around the clock to make sure the technology could handle the increasing volume of participation. Every corner of the country was watching, and the platform had to be flawless. Meanwhile, the political landscape was shifting. Senators and Congress members who had once vehemently opposed the initiative were now beginning to come to terms with it. Some, realizing that they couldn't fight the change, started calling for ways to collaborate with the new crowdsourced process. Others, unwilling to give up their grip on power, dug their heels in even further, launching a campaign to undermine the law and prevent its full implementation. But the people were watching. They had voted for this change, and now they were ready to hold their representatives accountable. For the first time in decades, the political establishment found themselves facing an informed and engaged electorate, an electorate that wasn't just passive but actively shaping the direction of the country. Elon was no longer just a tech mogul or a businessman, he had become a symbol of a new kind of leadership. He was still the visionary, the innovator, but now he was also the messenger of a movement that was reshaping the very fabric of governance. And while he was proud of the progress they had made, he knew that the real challenge lay in what came next. A new world was unfolding before them. A world where people could directly influence the laws that governed them. A world where technology and democracy could work together to create a more equitable, transparent system. But it was a world that would require constant vigilance, dedication, and adaptation. Elon sat in his office late one night, staring at the screens in front of him. The platform was running smoothly, but there was still so much work to do. He had to prepare for the inevitable pushback, and he had to figure out how to expand the reach of the Evolution Initiative to the rest of the world. The United States had taken the first step, but this was just the beginning. The phone buzzed on his desk, snapping him out of his thoughts. It was a message from Alex, "We've got a proposal for you. You need to see this." Elon quickly opened the message, which contained an early draft of an international expansion plan. The proposal outlined the steps they could take to bring the crowdsourced lawmaking process to other countries, starting with key democratic nations. It was ambitious, but Elon felt a spark of excitement. This was the next phase of their journey, the chance to bring this new model of governance to the global stage. But with it came risks. There would be nations that would welcome the idea, and others that would resist it, seeing it as a threat to their power. The path ahead would be fraught with challenges, but it was a challenge Elon was ready to take on. He looked out the window, taking in the lights of the city below. The future was uncertain, but for the first time, he felt like they had the power to shape it. The people had spoken. The law had passed. And now, it was time to move forward. As the months went by, the Evolution Initiative began to take root in the United States. Citizens were becoming more engaged than ever, participating in debates, voting on proposed laws, and even creating their own proposals for change. The crowdsourced system was proving to be more effective than many had imagined, and the government was slowly but surely adapting to the new reality. But despite the progress, there were still critics. Some claimed that the system was too decentralized, that it lacked the structure needed to govern effectively. Others argued that it was too easy for powerful interest groups to manipulate the process. The battle for the future of democracy was ongoing, and Elon knew that they couldn't afford to become complacent. As the global expansion began, Elon faced opposition from political leaders who feared the loss of control. But he also saw hope, as more and more citizens around the world demanded a say in how they were governed. The journey was just beginning, and the road ahead would be long and challenging. But Elon was no longer just fighting for the success of the Evolution Initiative. He was fighting for the future of democracy itself. The Evolution Initiative had sparked a revolution, but it was only the first step in a much larger movement. The true test would be whether this new form of democracy could survive and thrive in a world that was constantly changing. In the end, it wasn't just about the law. It was about the people, their voices, their choices, and their power to shape the world around them. And as long as that power remained in their hands, the possibilities were endless. Hit subscribe and leave a comment with where you're watching from. The Evolution Initiative has changed the course of history, but the journey is far from over. What do you think the future holds for democracy? Let us know your thoughts below.